Order. Catherine McKinnell to move the motion.
Thank you. I beg to move that the House has considered E-petition 619781, which calls for an immediate general election to end the chaos of the current government. And it's an honour to serve under your chairmanship today, Mr Mundell. And as we gather here in Westminster Hall this afternoon, the drama that is this current government is once again playing out in the chamber and on the news channels, with many members keen to question the Prime Minister, who has failed to come to Parliament today to account for events, and a Chancellor who was appointed by the Prime Minister just last week to try and sort this utter chaos out. I'm sure many more members would be here speaking today if there weren't such an important clash of business in the House today. But I am particularly disappointed that there are no government members here today to speak for the petitioners who would like to hear not only opposition views on this very important motion, but also government members' views also. It's no wonder that this petition has been signed by over 632,000 petitioners. The number is going up as we speak. I understand by about 1,000 signatures per hour. The petition is still open. And the numbers make this one of the most popular petitions considered by the Petitions Committee to date. And as chair, I'm pleased to have this opportunity to speak on the petitioner's behalf and indeed speak for pretty much anyone who I've spoken to in the last few days, weeks and months about the state of the country. The petition is very clear in its demand. It states, call an immediate general election to end the chaos of the current government so that the people can decide who should lead us through the unprecedented crises threatening the UK. It goes on to explain, the chaos engulfing the UK government is unprecedented. Over 40 ministers resigned, leaving departments without leadership during cost of living, energy and climate crises. War rages in Ukraine. The Northern Ireland Protocol has further damaged our relationship with Europe. Recession looms. The UK itself may cease to exist as Scotland seeks independence. This is the greatest set of challenges we have seen in our lifetimes. Let the people decide who leads us through this turmoil. And I want to pay tribute to Darren Charlesworth, who set up this petition. And I suspect little did he know that the chaos that led him to start this petition would only develop further into the mini-budget U-turns, the market turmoil, the sacking of the now ex-Chancellor, and the extraordinary scenes we saw this morning of the new Chancellor reversing the entire platform that the Prime Minister stood on. Or maybe he had the foresight to see how much worse it could get. There were plenty of warnings, and sadly, it's not over. The scenario facing us at the time this petition was started was the horror of Russia's illegal invasion of Ukraine, inflation reaching a 40-year high, unaffordable fuel bills, record backlogs in our NHS, and a looming winter of struggle ahead. Unfortunately, weeks on, with a new Prime Minister and now a second Chancellor, things have only got worse. Those signing the petition at the time were expressing their frustration at a governing party spending a summer focused inwards, choosing themselves a new leader, rather than dealing with these multiple crises. Rather than speaking to and engaging with the country and setting out a vision of what they should expect from a new Prime Minister, those of us outside of the Conservative Party, 99.7% of us, were left looking on, with no input into the process and precious little scrutiny, as planned televised interviews on BBC and Channel 4 were cancelled. It is so far removed from the scrutiny of an agenda for government that would be had in a general election campaign. And after recent events, and particularly this morning, we can see why such scrutiny matters. Chair, we live in a parliamentary democracy, and it's not the first time that a Prime Minister has changed during an election cycle. But we're now on to the fourth Conservative Prime Minister in little over 6 years, with the last three replaced not by the electorate, but by Conservative MPs and members. It's frustrating for the public, who have no say in who their Prime Minister is or their programme for government. However, the real boost to the number of signatories to this petition came once the new Prime Minister had been chosen. with their concerns heightened by the fact she'd received the backing of only 31% of her own MPs in the final ballot. This compares to 2019, where the member for Uxbridge and South Ruislip received 51% in the final ballot, and 2016, where the member for Maidenhead received 60%. We know it didn't end well for them. So is a Prime Minister with less support in their parliamentary party destined to fare any better? I'd say from recent events, clearly not. Most of the Prime Minister's policy proposals set out in her leadership campaign and hastily enacted in the disastrous mini-budget had no mandate whatsoever. Indeed, the over 632,000 people that have signed this petition represent nearly 8 times the number who voted for our current Prime Minister. But some may ask, why should this matter? The Prime Minister won under the rules set by the Conservative Party, which is currently the largest party in Parliament. And it's not without precedent. In 1976, when Harold Wilson announced his resignation at Prime Minister's questions, the then leader of the opposition asked if there would be an election, saying, "In spite of the political battles, we wish the Prime Minister well, personally, on his retirement. His decision has come at a time of great financial difficulty and of unprecedented parliamentary events. Is he aware that the best way to resolve the uncertainty and to give the new Prime Minister the authority required would be to put the matter to the people for their vote?" I don't often find myself agreeing with the late Margaret Thatcher, but on this point, I and the petitioners do. Lady Thatcher wasn't wrong about the lack of authority, and we're seeing the consequences of the lack of it unfolding before our eyes. Merely weeks into office, any semblance of authority that our Prime Minister may have had has been shattered, along with confidence in her and this government's ability to govern. Over the weekend, one of the government's own MPs described her as being like the chairman, whilst her new Chancellor would act as the CEO, not even trying to hide the fact that she is in office, but not in power. Yep. Then there's the mini-budget. The then Chancellor proclaimed he wanted to bet big on the British economy. We've seen just how reckless that was. Yeah. And the question remains, who gave them permission to gamble in such a way with our public finances? How on earth was this allowed to happen? Who gave the then Chancellor and Prime Minister permission to bypass the checks and balances that go with such a fiscal event, including growth forecasts and spending commitments calculated by the Independent Office for Budget Responsibility? Not even the 81,326 Conservative Party members who voted for the Prime Minister gave permission for that. And the IFS warned that it was the biggest package of cuts, tax cuts in 50 years, without even a semblance of an effort to make the public finance numbers add up. The National Institute of Economic and Social Research said uncertainty caused by the fiscal event was directly pushing up longer-term borrowing costs. The government lacked a mandate to make these disastrous changes, and it still lacks a mandate to try and clean it up. Whilst the package has now been scrapped, the damage to the UK will be long-lasting, with higher borrowing costs, higher mortgages, and damage to our reputation for years to come. It will never be forgotten. Nope. As many are rightly asking, what is the point of this government now that their showpiece policies, all rainbows and unicorns, that they spent the summer waxing lyrical about, have landed calamitously and been swiftly withdrawn the instant they met with reality? When Downing Street cannot govern, it is incapable of stepping up to the significant and pressing challenges that our country faces, and we desperately need a government that can. So what is left of the government's programme? Well, whilst the budget has been reversed, we still have fracking. Yeah. Despite the Conservatives' own 2019 manifesto pledge, we will not support fracking unless the science shows categorically that it can be done safely. The government is seemingly still intent on lifting the ban on fracking licences without any consultation, assurances on safety, or local planning considerations, and despite the fact it's a policy that few can support. Then there's the current debate around benefits uprating. Remarkably, the member for Richmond, 3 chancellors ago, promised that benefits would be uprated in line with inflation, but the current Prime Minister has not confirmed whether this will be the case, and concerns have been heightened by commitments made on pensions, but not on the uprating of benefits. Working parents, disabled people and the poorest pensioners are already being hit by skyrocketing cost of living. The government has no mandate for inflicting unconscionable misery on the poorest in our society, and I know many government MPs feel the same. And what government MPs will find even harder to justify without such a mandate is the fact that the cap on bankers' bonuses has been lifted at the same time as the poorest are potentially set to be punished. Indeed, the lifting of the cap on bankers' bonuses is one of the only other measures in the mini-budget that is left. Today marks the United Nations International Day for the Eradication of Poverty and the start of Challenge Poverty Week. 41% of babies, children and young people are growing up in households in receipt of universal credit or legacy benefits. That figure is 52% in my region of the North East. The failure to uprate with inflation will have a devastating impact on those households, compounding our already quite shocking levels of child poverty in the UK. Where is the mandate from the public for this government to preside over the poorest in our country being made poorer and for increasing numbers of children growing up in poverty? Where is the democratic accountability for a government that has no mandate for the policies that it currently seeks to pursue? Why should anyone trust this government to clean up this mess that they've made in the last few weeks? Would we ask the person who started a fire in our house to be responsible for putting it out? Of course not. Far from being a fresh administration, buzzing with new ideas, this is a tired, worn out and weak administration going round in circles and damaging our reputation at home and abroad. The spectacle of our great country being led by government MPs desperately clinging to power and trying to distance themselves from the previous 12 years is embarrassing to watch. The petitioners have a very clear ask, that there's an end to the chaos engulfing the government and our country, and that the people should have the chance to decide who should lead us going forward. So can I ask the Minister, when he comes to speak, to answer how the public can have confidence in the competence of government that just days into office took such a reckless, irresponsible gamble with the public's finances? What authority does the Prime Minister now have after being forced to abandon that entire policy platform only weeks into office and sack her Chancellor? When will people on the lowest incomes have confirmation that benefits will uprate with inflation as promised by the government just weeks ago? How can the country have faith in anything the government says when over the last few weeks it has backtracked on most of its promises and appears set to do so again after warning of difficult choices to be made? And most importantly, when will the public be given their say on how they want this country to be governed? Because it is within the government's gift to call an election. Failing that, government MPs can join with opposition MPs to put things right. And whatever government is elected, at least it will have the support of the British people. And it's not just the 632,000 petitioners who believe that the public deserve a say. In January, the now Business Secretary stated, "The mandate is personal rather than entirely party, and any Prime Minister would be very well advised to seek a fresh mandate." The former Culture Secretary tweeted earlier this month, "No one asked for this, and if the Prime Minister wants a whole new mandate, she must take it to the country." And the member for Wyre Forest has stated that there should be an election soon because we can't expect people to put up with the psychodrama of the Conservative Party indefinitely. And I couldn't agree more, but they need to put their money where their mouths are on this. In the words of the petition creator, Darren Charlesworth, said that the Prime Minister has torn up the manifesto which saw them elected, and the major change in direction and policy requires a general election, regardless of which party happens to be in power. He feels that the current situation is dangerous and a distraction from the business of running the country, and believes it needs to come to a decisive end with a general election immediately. So as well as the over 632,000 petitioners who agree with Darren, a poll out today from Good Morning Britain found an astonishing 93% of respondents wanting a general election, with Channel 4 similarly finding only 8% believing that the Prime Minister should remain. This situation is completely unacceptable and unsustainable. Since 2010, our country has faced monumental changes. A coalition government, a referendum in Scotland, Brexit, parliamentary gridlock, the illegal proroguing of Parliament, and a pandemic. The former Prime Minister oversaw the complete erosion of standards in public life before being forced from office as scandal caught up with him. These seismic changes and the ensuing chaos have tested our constitution and our patience to the limit. After 12 years in office, the country deserves a chance to have their say on this government and its programme. Today, as with most days, we all woke up to another chaotic day in politics. It's damaging and it's exhausting, but it doesn't have to be this way. And this is not about party politics. I know many who will have signed this petition will have voted Conservative at the last election and may do so again. What nobody voted for was this chaos, caused by a lack of clear mandate that any government would need to have the authority to face up to the challenges that we have lying ahead. MPs owe a duty to the public to govern in the national interest, and this petition is calling on the government to do the right thing and put an end to the uncertainty and lack of authority and give people their say. And if this government has any hope of rebuilding trust with the electorate, it should do exactly that today.
The question is that this House has considered E-petition 619781 relating to an early general election, and I call Alex Davies-Jones.
Thank you, Mr Mundell, and it is an honour to speak today with you in the Chair. I come to today's debate having been what I believe the first member to call for a general election this side of summer, in the Chamber during Prime Minister's questions on September the 7th. It is therefore a great privilege that I am able to build upon this premonition and contribute to today's debate to fully outline the reasons why a general election is now the only possible way forward. Almost 1,000 of my constituents have now signed this petition calling for change. Whilst the petition was originally set up before the new Prime Minister was even in post, the astonishing scenes we have seen this afternoon with the Chancellor's stunning reversal of virtually all of the Prime Minister's economic policies makes the wording of the petition even more relevant than ever. The petition quite rightly notes the chaos engulfing the UK government is unprecedented. Well, I don't know about you, Mr Mundell, but I'm sick of living in unprecedented times. Yes. Chair, this was even before the disastrous events of the Prime Minister's mini-budget had even taken place. Make no mistake, the government is now in even deeper chaos than before. Not yet 6 weeks into a new leadership and a new cabinet, collective responsibility has all but disintegrated. Cabinet members are now openly briefing against their own leaders' policies in newspaper op-eds, and today, in perhaps the final nail in the coffin, her new Chancellor has completely demolished the ideology of her economic project. Her flagship cut to the basic rate of income tax, gone. Cuts to the dividend taxes, abandoned. VAT-free shopping, scrapped. And the hugely important government scheme to cap skyrocketing energy costs for families, a scheme that may have actually done some good for constituents in my seat of Pontypridd. Naturally, this government have chosen to shamefully water it down. Chair, the government is now so divided, so fractured, that talk of changing to a third Tory Prime Minister in a single year would make a laughingstock of our democracy. The damage is already done. All of us in this place know the truth. The British people know the truth, and it is only this government who are turning a blind eye while the economy continues to spiral out of control. Overnight, people's pension funds vanished, mortgages skyrocketed, and our country was pushed even further into an economic and political crisis of this government's own making. This is unprecedented government incompetence. I have had countless residents in Pontypridd and Taff-Ely contact me to say that they are genuinely worried about surviving the winter because they cannot afford to turn the heating on. That is the reality of this crisis. There are lives at risk this winter. Chair, is that not a disgraceful indictment of this government's failings? It is because of the astonishing fiscal incompetence that I call for a general election during PMQs in September. We need a general election because changing the figurehead at the top of the party just isn't enough. As I said in September, I know residents in my local area will never forget that the Prime Minister played a key role in a government that failed millions. The governing party in this country is at absolute war with itself and has lost the respect of the British public. For the new Tory Chancellor, their fourth Chancellor in as many months, to feel compelled to urgently address this House this afternoon in order to fully overhaul the Prime Minister's disastrous mini-budget just shows how panicked the Tory party are. They have completely destroyed their own credibility, and they know it. But it's not just the incompetence we've seen during the energy crisis. This is 12 years of failed Tory rule. Historic failure of this government to invest sufficiently in renewables and nuclear has exacerbated this energy crisis. Historic failure of this government to wean our financial systems off the Russian oligarch money has left us internationally exposed to Putin's posturing as he tries to weaken the West's resolve. And historic failure of this government to stimulate any kind of real economic growth in the last 12 years has left our economy weaker and more vulnerable than ever before. Make no mistake, the Tory party is currently the biggest threat to the financial security of thousands of families in my constituency and across the whole of the United Kingdom. As the approval ratings of this doomed Prime Minister reach new depths every single day or hour, I don't think we've ever had a government that has failed so spectacularly to command the confidence of its own party, let alone the country. And even worse, the UK government seem to have forgotten that the decisions made in Westminster have a real impact for local communities across the country. I have genuine concerns that local authorities across the UK who provide vital services to residents are feeling the impact of every single U-turn by this government. In my constituency, Rhondda Cynon Council are doing as much as they can with extremely limited resources, but more devastating tax cuts and shamefully low levels of investment are putting councils like mine under more pressure than ever before. Shamefully, it is our communities, the most vulnerable residents that depend on these services, that will suffer the most when the Tories refuse to act. It is not just their fiscal incompetence. Across the board, sectors that have been crying out for government action for years have been completely disregarded by a government that has clearly lost interest in governing. Where is the desperately needed gambling review, which we were promised all the way back in December 2022? Where is the long-awaited and long-overdue online safety bill that this House vitally needs in order to change lives for the better? And don't get me started for the complete disregard to safety for all people in the UK. It is clear to me, and increasingly clear to the government's own MPs, that the only way out of this mess is through a general election. So bring it on. Let's have this general election. Let's turn the page on the Tory incompetence for good. Let's let the people decide. Thank you, Chair.
I call Ruth Jones.
Thank you, Mr Mundell, and it's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship this afternoon. And I am grateful for the opportunity to speak today in this important debate on E-petition 619871. And I pay tribute to my honourable friend, the member for Newcastle North, for speaking so well and giving voice to so many of the concerns felt by me and an increasing number of my constituents in Newport West. The state of our nation is far from strong, and it is important that we recognise that challenges and obstacles faced by the people of our United Kingdom have been caused by the party opposite and our Prime Minister. This is a Tory crisis made in Downing Street, and it's being paid for by working people in Newport West and across the country. This 12-year-old Conservative government has crushed the economy through enormous unfunded tax cuts. It's left people worried as they face up to higher mortgages and soaring costs, and they've done nothing to show they understand how serious the situation is. On Friday, the Right Honourable Member for Spelthorne was fired by the Prime Minister, who is his ideological bedfellow. They were in lockstep on all the key elements of the government policy we've seen announced since September the 6th, 2022. Mr Mundell, we don't simply need a change of Chancellor, we need a change of government, and we need a general election. Of course, people on the other side of the House, if they were here, would say that it's His Majesty's opposition has to call for an election. It's what they do. That's their job. But we are beyond simply saying it for the sake of it. Indeed, the Sunday Times editorial yesterday has called for a change of Prime Minister and a general election. And I quite agree, and feel sure that my right honourable friend, the leader of the opposition, stands ready to lead. Our nation is in peril, Mr Mundell. Our people from Scotland to Wales, from England to Northern Ireland, are having to decide between heating and eating. And now with rising mortgages, people across the nation now face losing their homes. We are in a disgraceful situation, and not one word from any minister sitting in this government reassures me that they understand the challenge before them. Nor do they understand the task of change required, or indeed that if we don't stabilise the markets through sensible policy decisions, we will not just be pushing our people to the edge, we will be pushing them over the cliff. I did not come to this place, nor was I elected by the people of Newport West to stand by and let this reckless, out-of-touch and inward-looking Tory government get away with destroying the lives of tens of millions of people. And that's where we are, Mr Mundell. And as my friend from Newcastle North made clear, that's why we need a general election. And the petition before us has more than 500,000 signatures. In fact, as the honourable member has just said, 630,000 already, and that number is still increasing. And we as parliamentarians have a responsibility to give voice to their fears, their worries, their concerns and their demands. My constituent, Amanda Bayliss, who lives in Caerleon and who I asked for a quote this afternoon, and she's already volunteered, said, "Dear Ruth, I am appalled and devastated by the actions of this current government. I'm genuinely worried and afraid for my future and that of my children and grandchildren." And she goes on to say that this government must be stopped at all costs before there is nothing left of this country and we reach a point of no return. And it's not just Amanda in Caerleon. All across Newport West, I am being accosted by people in the supermarket, on the street, and yesterday even in church, by people who are saying, for goodness sake, Ruth, get rid of this government. And I have to tell them, Mr Mundell, I don't have the power. But this petition shows the strength of feeling across this United Kingdom. So our United Kingdom is living through a moment of profound change. It needs a government that can deliver an economy that works for everyone, delivering the jobs and growth of the future. We've been reminded in recent days of how working people have been left counting the cost of 12 years of Tory government. The Conservative Party's failure to grow the economy has resulted in stagnant wages and broken public services. Now, the Labour Party has a serious plan for growth and wants to see all our nations and regions benefit from and contribute to the jobs and growth of the future as we deliver net zero. The MP for South West Surrey, the Chancellor of the Exchequer, I believe now, is now the de facto Prime Minister without a single vote being cast by a single person. We know now that the Prime Minister believes in the failed trickle-down ideology of the past that has locked Britain out of growth and will never deliver for working people. My party will deliver for working people as it is in Wales, where Labour under the First Minister Mark Drayford is delivering for the people in Newport West and people across Wales. The Tories here and in Wales are the party of vested interest and their time has come. That's why we need a general election, and when it comes, Labour will deliver the fairer, greener future this country deserves. Thank you.
I call Catherine West.
Thank you very much, Mr Mundell, and it's a pleasure to contribute to this debate under your leadership. This is a Tory crisis made in Downing Street and paid for by working people, as my honourable friend, the member for Newport West, has said. And changing the Chancellor over the weekend or making a partial U-turn doesn't undo the damage that's been done by the Prime Minister and the Conservative Party, who selfishly used the whole of the summer, rather than focusing on the needs of working families on their energy bills, used all of the summer for their infighting, and now look where they've landed us. They've undermined our institutions and trashed our standing on the world stage, damaging our credibility as a place to invest. They need to get on with reversing this budget to reassure the markets, and yet the statement that's being delivered right as we speak over in the other debating chamber does not give me much cause for pleasure, because I believe that it is going to lead to more hardship for working people. And that is basically balancing the books on the back of working people who have played no role in crashing the economy in this way. The problem is the philosophy of trickle-down economics, which the Prime Minister seemed to promote when she was first elected by the Tory party members as the Prime Minister. However, the confusing part of this is really not just for members of the public and for the markets and for us as MPs, is that the new Chancellor appears to have turned all that on its head. The Conservatives crashed the economy for unfunded tax cuts for the wealthiest, causing mortgages to skyrocket and people worried sick about their pensions. And now when the Prime Minister was asked to come to Parliament to explain, somehow she sent someone else and was not able to even turn up to apologise for what she'd done to wreck our standing in the world and to wreck the economy in the way that she has. Now, I'd be very happy with a general election. I do hope that some fresh faces might improve the situation somewhat. And the important thing is, as the representative from Tesco Supermarket said yesterday on the BBC, in the end, the Labor Party has got a plan and has got the confidence of large groups like Tesco's and others. And when you have Tesco or another large company like that agreeing with the trade unions that the economy has been wrecked by the government, then you really know that it is time for some fresh faces. And we're ready. Yeah. We've been watching for 12 years. We've been watching as child poverty has skyrocketed. We've been watching as the promises of levelling up, which was a good Tory pledge, it was a good suggestion, it was a good idea, but that has utterly failed. And we're going to see that now as the Chancellor announces all the cutting back of capital and revenue spend in the poorest corners of the UK. Now, we know that with the institutions such as the Office of Budget Responsibility not having laid out its view, it's very difficult for us to say exactly in pounds and pennies what Labor would do. But I do believe that we have enough of an outline and something which is much more convincing than what the government will take to the general election. It may not come today, it may not come tomorrow, but we all know that the general election is not far off. Yeah. Now, let's talk very briefly about the mortgage situation. We will need a plan for people's mortgages because these eye-watering mortgage increases will cause homeowners across the country sleepless nights. And myself representing an area where there are very expensive mortgages because the cost of housing is so high in London for those who can buy their own homes, people are very, very stretched indeed. And I have heard of a mum who told me that she just had sleepless nights saying, how am I going to come up with £800 as of next spring? I don't know where that's going to come from because her job is quite well paid, but it doesn't pay another £800 a month. These are the sorts of conversations up and down the country that families are having. This will lead to more families breaking up too, because it's known, it is a fact, that the more financial worries on people, the more that families tend to be able to break up under the weight of financial worry. So we know the other thing that is very much on our minds as Labor MPs is the question of benefits and what will happen to those who are poorest in our society. We know that the most common event that we are invited to attend in our constituencies is the opening of food banks. You know, having been involved both in local and national politics since 2001, I have never gone to so many food banks. The Bounds Green Food Bank tells me that whereas before they used to open at 10 in the morning and close at 1, they now close at 11 because in 1 hour all the food is gone and there are fewer and fewer people who are able to donate to the food bank. And this crisis is doubly unfair on those who need to use food banks. Now, we know that what must be done is that for working parents, disabled people and the poorest pensioners, they must have the knowledge that our government, when we get in, will indeed make sure that they can pay for the cost of living. In fact, I feel once we get in and there are fresh faces and fresh energy, that I believe that the economy will improve a bit just on the basis that we have more energy and some ideas. Because like any government in a democracy, governments do tend to run out of ideas. And I do believe after 12 years that this is a genuine fact that the government has run out of ideas. And we definitely saw that in the summer when the Tory candidates seemed to be saying some really nonsensical things and being completely out of touch with what the average person is really deeply worried about. Now, another couple of points that I would like to make. I am very worried about the treatment of the civil service within the scenario that we have seen in the last month. It wasn't just the fact that the Office for Budget Responsibility did not give an outline or was not permitted to give an outline to MPs, to journalists, to markets, to citizens. It was also the fact that pushing out the head of the civil service and the Treasury on day one sent a very bad message to all of those parties, because over the years civil servants in our system do hold up the non-partisan approach to what is the right thing for the country. Now, that's not to say that there can't be conflicts or debates between a politician and a civil servant, but in the end, sacking the most senior civil servant of the Treasury was one of the most troubling things that I've ever seen since I have been in this House. Not allowing the OBR to make its statement, publicly trashing institutions like the think tanks and Institute for Fiscal Studies over the summer, using very negative language about the Governor of the Bank of England when his job is financial stability for this country. Time and again during the summer, during the leadership election, there were subliminal and quite outspoken criticisms of the Bank of England, the Governor of the Bank of England. And so really what happened was that the scene was being set for a trashing of the institutions which basically, through a gentleman's agreement, hold together our standing domestically and internationally. And that was completely detonated when the current incumbent in Downing Street, I assume she's still there, got into power. So the judgment of that individual has come into our sight. And one other thing which has been really bothering me in the last couple of weeks, and Mr. Mundell, as we do have a couple of minutes up our sleeves, if I could indulge just to mention that I read in the Guardian newspaper that when the Prime Minister moved into Downing Street, she moved out of the former Prime Minister's office, Mr. Johnson's office, and she allowed her assistant, Mr. Fulbrook, to move into that office. So Mr. Mark Fulbrook is actually based in Mr. Johnson's office, and apparently the current Prime Minister uses the Cabinet room for her discussions. Fair enough. But it worries me deeply that an individual who has got a very questionable record on two counts, firstly, the question over who he has advised in the Libyan setup, whether he has advised correct people there, and secondly, on the question of his advice to a gubernatorial race in the USA, where money has come into his company so that he could work on somebody else's campaign, and the FBI have actually been looking at whether the funding has been correctly transferred from one party to another. To have somebody who's being investigated by the FBI sitting in Mr. Johnson's office chills me to the bone. But that is the sort of government that has finally got itself into power in this country. So what I would say is we need, regardless of how many days left this government has got, we need urgently to have an independent ethics advisor appointed. Other members in this House may be able to clarify, but my understanding is that the Prime Minister said this was not urgent and that she didn't think it was particularly necessary. And I think that's one of the things which we need with urgency, because only a new government really can clean up the mess that this government's got itself into. I briefly wanted to talk about the constituents who have written to me about their cost of living crisis, who currently are not necessarily going to food banks, but who are finding their living very, very difficult indeed. They have told me how much food has gone up in the supermarket. Real basics like milk, butter, chicken, all those basics which should be able to be put on a table and feed families. The energy costs, the petrol to go into someone's car, all those costs have been soaring, and yet what we've been discussing here in the House of Commons often does not reflect that pain that many people are going through. So what we want to see is workers getting a decent pay. We want to see workers respected. We want to see their rights at work respected as well. Not a government that seeks to roll back further the rights of trade unions or wishes to roll back the rights of people who genuinely want to protest against what this government is doing. Instead, we're seeing increasing authoritarianism, which seems to go hand in hand with the financial mistakes this government has made. We also want to see the question of the national grid and energy shortages addressed with some sincerity and honesty. Last week and the week before, when National Grid warned that there were going to be blackouts, no one really believed it when the government said, "We'll be fine," because we've been told that before, and then we have a crisis. That's the thing, I think, which is deeply distressing, is to see the lack of honesty. What we need is a government to be honest, to say there could well be blackouts. If there are, this is what you do, 1, 2, 3. Don't let people live in fear that that is going to happen without the correct advice about what to do in those cases. So on the question of clean power, which obviously links in with the national grid question, we will launch, as the next Labor government, an urgent mission for a fossil fuel electricity system by 2030, making the UK a clean energy superpower, exporting clean power to the rest of the world. We know that the gas future price projections would save UK households $93 billion over the rest of this decade, or an average saving of £475 per household every year until 2030. We also know that this world-leading commitment would support the creation of over 200,000 direct jobs and up to 260 to 300,000 indirect jobs. It's this kind of vision and this kind of plan, this kind of investment in skills and the future, and a proper plan for our regions, which is giving the likes of the Tesco boss who said Labor had a plan, confidence that we do have a plan. The UK would be the first major economy to make this world-leading commitment alongside some smaller European countries like Austria, Portugal, Denmark and the Netherlands. It complements Labour's plans to increase energy efficiency, including through our Warm Homes plan, to insulate 19 million cold, drafty homes over a decade. I know a number of members in this House have been on local authority councils before. As a borough leader in 2010, we had a very good program for giving away boilers to the private rented sector, and we had a plan to retrofit drafty Victorian properties. And it was very disappointing to see that after 2010, when Mr Osborne entered the House of Commons and decided to just trash all spending to councils, all of those important green programs which insulated homes in 2010, we would have had 30% more warm homes in my constituency if that small amount of funding had just been allowed just to continue in every single borough. And I'm sure that if that was replicated across the UK, we would be spending so much less as a nation on fuel and energy in general. And on that point, I know that Martin Lewis has come out with his most recent projection of what fuel bills will look like next year. And I'm pleased that we will not be opposing the legislation this evening relating to the energy price guarantee. But for goodness sake, get the money off the companies. Don't put it onto debt, because that will make the markets go all crazy again. You know, we have to listen to what the opposition is saying and sometimes accept that we have come up with some good ideas. So, to conclude, Mr Mundell, and thank you for being very patient as I went all round a very circuitous route on the question of a general election. I think I've laid out some of our good ideas. We will have an energy policy for the future. We will have a plan for working people. We will have a vision for no more food banks. We will have a vision for the building of more affordable homes for our residents. We will have a vision of enhancing our role in the world, and we will also hopefully look at eliminating the huge trade deficit that we have, which I know is another area which worries many of us on the Labor benches as well. And I do hope that with some fresh faces and with some energy through the upcoming general election, which I'm sure will come, that we will end up with a wonderful team of committed Labor cabinet members and a Labor team that will restore us to the best country in the world.
Yeah.
Thank you. I now call SNP spokesperson Owen Thompson.
Thank you, Mr Mundell, and it's a pleasure to serve with you in the chair. It's a bit of a challenge to prepare for a debate like this today, because we're living through the most unprecedented series of political earthquakes, with the ground constantly shifting beneath our feet. It's almost like we're living in a time when the longevity of a Prime Minister or a Chancellor is measured in hours rather than months and years. So do please forgive me if I keep an eye on my phone to make sure that ministers and policies remain the same as when I rose. But it is good to see that the Minister in his place and that he's certainly not hiding under any desks, as others may have been suggested that they were. But the short-lived government has pivoted so many times already. There's been so many U-turns that there's absolutely no idea what direction that we're travelling in. We're lurching speedily towards a cliff edge. Effectively, all of the promises and pledges so firmly given by the Prime Minister during the long and tedious leadership campaign and reinforced several times over the last couple of weeks have been abandoned. We have to be left wondering if the notorious mini-budget was a mere mirage to our collective consciences, a tax cut to the wealthiest, the basic rate cut, the dividend tax cut, the corporation tax cut, all gone, along with the former Chancellor himself. The only positive bit, I guess, the 2-year energy cap that provided so much needed certainty to struggling households, it's gone. It's not even there now. So what next? Who knows? The Prime Minister might even have gone by the time I sit down, although who would take over the poisoned chalice is another matter. Even as an opposition member, I have to say, it's almost too painful to watch at times the embarrassing farce of a government limping on. It feels particularly shambolic. It feels like a particularly shambolic episode of The Apprentice, and at this stage, I don't think I'd be surprised if Lord Sugar suddenly appeared to fire the lot of them. It's certainly beyond any parody that could be imagined in the thick of it, and I'm sure a few of us could imagine, or only begin to imagine, what might be coming out of the mouth of Malcolm Tucker if he were having to deal with such a situation. You have to know it's gone too far, though, when you can no longer tell the satire from the ridiculous reality. But the gross economic consequences of the incompetence of all of it has deadly serious consequences for millions of people across the UK. These are people working 40 hours or more a week and are still unable to make ends meet. Established businesses at risk of going under because they can't afford to pay soaring energy bills. Families going hungry or afraid of losing their homes. I held a cost of living event in Gorebridge in my constituency just on Friday past, where I had invited the Prime Minister to attend so that she might be able to answer directly constituents' concerns. However, despite watching out for her, I regret to inform the House that she didn't attend, a bit like earlier today. I was hearing harrowing stories there, though, from many people struggling simply to make ends meet, and they didn't know where to turn. Now, we've got a fantastic sense of community in Midlothian, and we had a great range of partners in attendance, so we were able to point people to some of the right places. But what can people do when the government fails so spectacularly and the people it's meant to serve? So I completely understand where the petition has come from and why it's gathered such high numbers, now 633,000, and continuing to rise. I'm watching it clock up as a stand, including over 1,000 people in my own constituency of Midlothian. People are absolutely scunnered by what they've witnessed, and at a time of crisis, when they want competent government of their own choosing, not a Prime Minister chosen by a few. And in response to the petition, the government argued that the UK is not a presidential system. I'm glad they finally acknowledged that, because the Prime Minister and her predecessor, whose paw prints are all over the mess that we're in, don't seem to hold much truck in collective decision-making. They blatantly disregarded evidence. It seemed reluctant to inform Cabinet colleagues of their latest bag of the fag packet policy. And for some time, there's been an unhealthy trend in the UK towards more personality-based politics, something that perhaps needs to be reflected on in calmer times. Of course, having a government that we didn't vote for isn't something new for those of us in Scotland. It's a normal state over the last number of years. And I'm very grateful at least that we have a clear exit route in front of us to escape from this bourach, with a modern, proportionate parliamentary system working well in Holyrood already, and a Scottish Government ready with an alternative plan for our future, should the people choose it. Independence for Scotland is not a threat to the rest of the UK or the social bonds we cherish. It's an opportunity for a more equal partnership where Scotland could demonstrate to the rest of these isles the genuine alternative to the status quo. We could protect the fabric of our communities, look after vulnerable citizens and protect our landscapes and nature. We could build a new, greener industrial base, becoming the renewable powerhouse of Europe and rejoining our European partners in free trade and travel across the continent. We could value everyone, no matter where they come from, and create a fairer, wealthier and more equal society. This will create sustainable, shared prosperity far better than any trickle-down economics ever could, relying on scraps from a rich man's table. In Scotland, we have a cast-iron mandate for a referendum on our future, yet still this discredited government, and disappointingly I have to say the official opposition, still seem to block all democratic paths to achieve it. Choice is the key issue here, something that seems to have been forgotten in the corridors of power in this place. The right to self-determination is a fundamental and inalienable right of all people. It's enshrined in international law, in the UN Charter and the International Covenant of Civil and Political Rights. The UK Government supports the principle for other countries, but not, it seems, for Scotland. For this chaotic and unpopular government to continue to say no to a referendum is more like the actions of a dictatorship than a democracy. And I hope whoever the next Prime Minister is, whenever they come along, will reconsider this position. While I agree with the growing call for a general election, it's not a long-term solution for our broken system. I would urge all Democrats, whether supporting independence or not, to get behind Scotland's right to choose. Democracy is not a one-time event. We've seen a Prime Minister who's been able to change her mind within the space of a matter of days on the policies that she's got. So why shouldn't the people of Scotland be able to change their mind after 8 years of broken promises? The ground's shifted many times. All the big claims from Better Together have been so spectacularly wrong. Staying in the UK didn't keep us in the European Union. It did not protect energy prices, and it most certainly didn't keep the economy on a steady course. The future of Scots mortgages and pensions has never been more uncertain than it is today. And when circumstances change, the people have a right to change their minds, as we see demonstrated again and again by the U-turn after U-turn from the current Prime Minister. Whatever the party of government choose to do next, we have to remember that the crisis we face didn't begin with the current Prime Minister, at least the one who was the Prime Minister at the time of writing. And it won't end when she goes, if indeed she is still in post. We've had 12 years of Conservative mismanagement, with energy policies unfit for purpose and austerity policies bringing public services to their knees, with no solution to the continued chaos from Brexit, a disaster for our businesses, public sector, for education and research, for holidaymakers, travel and cultural life. And sadly, Labour have no answer to that point. Another general election might put a plaster on some of these wounds, but it won't heal the UK's chronic problems. Independence for Scotland is an idea whose time has come, and it can't come soon enough.
I now call Shadow Minister Fleur Anderson.
Thank you very much, Mr Mundell, and it's a pleasure to serve under your chairship for this momentous debate. And thank you to the member for Newcastle North and the chair of the Petitions Committee for fast-tracking this debate to this chamber, for putting the case for a general election so well. She does speak for so many people across this country. And a huge thank you and congratulations to the 633,000+ members of the public who have supported this e-petition to secure today's debate. That's over 500,000 in the last 2 weeks alone, and over 1,000 people are signing it every hour at the moment. This is being watched by an unusual number of people for a Westminster Hall debate, I believe. It is a staggering number of people who've signed it since July the 28th. And I've had it confirmed that this is the first e-petition calling for a general election to be debated in this House. I was proud to see over 110,000 of my constituents in Putney sign it too. I think all of us here today, and many other members, can say that they've had an unusual number of people signing this petition. It really is very significant. So congratulations to Darren Charlesworth as well for launching this petition back in July. Back then he said the chaos engulfing the UK government is unprecedented. Over 40 ministers resigned, leaving departments without leadership during the cost of living, energy and climate crises. War rages in Ukraine. The Northern Ireland Protocol has further damaged our relationship with Europe. Recession looms. The UK itself may cease to exist as Scotland seeks independence. This is the greatest set of challenges we've seen in our lifetimes. Let the people decide who leads us through this turmoil. This is how the petitioner, and thousands of people signed it, felt back in July. But look what's happened since. We've had a Prime Minister voted in by the very few, launching a new economic strategy with no mandate, prioritising VAT-free shopping for tourists, of all things, and tax cuts for the super rich, tanking the pound, causing the Bank of England to have to step in, jeopardising pensions, soaring mortgage costs, U-turning on the 45p rate of tax and then on corporation tax, ditching her Chancellor after 38 days. And then this morning, ditching the 2-year energy price cap, ditching the income tax cut, ditching the freeze on alcohol duties, ditching the VAT-free shopping for tourists, fair enough, ditching dividend and freelance reforms, and who else knows what's changing as we speak to, as the Chancellor of the Exchequer is giving a statement in the House of Commons right now. And I'm sure, as the member for Newcastle North said, that there would be more members in this chamber if that were not happening right now. The member for Newcastle North reiterated that there is no mandate, that people have lost patience with the government. No one wants to be signing this petition asking for a general election unless it's absolutely essential, and we seem to have no other option. And that the popular polls are even higher than the number of people signing this petition show in terms of people who want to see a general election. And the damage being done by not raising benefits and the damage to child poverty levels, which surely should be uppermost in our minds. The member for Pontypridd has outlined the incompetence of the last few months, but also put that in context of the 12 years of Tory rule, of local government underfunding, and the failure to stimulate growth, which is the biggest threat to financial security of families that we are seeing. The member for Newport West, saying that she's stopped in the street by people who are so worried and afraid. And she is not alone. I'm often stopped in the street as well, Chair. And just this morning, I went to visit a food bank in my local constituency and was told by so many people of the fear that they have at the moment. And that's why they are talking about calling a general election. We are in unprecedented times. And the member for Hornsey and Wood Green with a whole list of reasons why we need a general election, starting with the failed philosophy of trickle-down economics and calling that out. And that's really what we've seen laid bare over the last few weeks. That loss of trust of businesses and unions alike, and the issues of benefits and mortgages, food banks, energy provision, and it goes on. There are many reasons why people have signed this petition, Chair, many reasons why they're calling for an election. So I often say when debating in this House and the other that debates are timely, but this is a timely debate more than most. This petition is highly significant, and I hope that I will hear in the Minister's response a reflection on that significance, rather than any brushing this aside and saying that it would be too disruptive for us at this time. No, I think people signing this petition feel that sticking with what we have got now is the disruptive thing. Because here in this House, we are entrusted to make decisions on behalf of everyone in the country only on the basis of a democratic mandate of the people who've chosen to elect us to be here. There is a pact with the British people, arisen from hundreds of years of history, that parties share their manifesto, what they will do, and on the basis of that manifesto, parties are chosen or elected, and from the party with the biggest number, the Prime Minister is chosen to deliver that manifesto mandate. We are very close to losing the trust of the nation because that mandate is being broken with every statement and with every press conference. And it's not just a matter of communication. It's not just because the new leader was chosen without a clear majority of even her own MPs supporting her. It's a loss of faith with the policies of the Conservative government, that they are not the ones that were in the manifesto. A loss of faith that these policies are not in the best interests of people across the country, but are in the best interests only of the Conservative Party. The markets lost faith in Conservative policies. The pound tanked, mortgage prices soared. But this petition shows that the people have lost faith as well. No one voted for the biggest raft of tax cuts since 1972. No one voted for £45 billion of tax cuts with no fiscal strategy. No one voted for bankers' bonuses. No one voted for trickle-down economics with no evidence that it will actually trickle down. No one voted for U-turns on banning no-fault evictions. No one voted for the economy to be plunged into chaos. No one voted to ditch the Green Homes Grant after just a few weeks. No one voted for lifting the moratorium on fracking. No one voted to scrap crucial environmental protection laws, to attack nature, and even turn on the RSPB, the National Trust, the Wildlife Trust and the Ramblers. No one voted to reduce workers' rights. No one voted to pull out of the European Convention on Human Rights. No one voted for Brexit chaos to continue, to jeopardise the trade deal with India, shelve the trade deal with the US. No one voted to trash our institutions or to bury reports from the Office of Budget Responsibility. No one voted for soaring mortgages and the follow-on that will inevitably result in rent costs increasing at the same time as a cost of living crisis. No one voted to damage still further our international reputation, and no one voted to damage our union. And the fact that the Prime Minister has not even called the First Ministers of Scotland or Wales yet is a scandal. Our union is precious. What the Prime Minister is doing and not even telephoning the two First Ministers is shocking. Maybe the Minister can confirm when those phone calls will take place. So, what next? A general election may be a short-term disruption, but the damage to our economy, the damage to people's lives, the damage to the union could be far longer. This Prime Minister is no different from her predecessor, and so no wonder people's patience has run out. She seems to be interested only now in saving her own skin at all costs. The public won't forgive, and they won't forget. This is a Tory crisis, made in Downing Street, but paid for by working people, up and down my constituency, that of every member present, and that of all members. It is important to put this petition in the context of the last 3 years. These problems did not start in July when the petition started, or in September. There have been 3 years of scandal and sleaze and sloppy governance. Can the Minister also confirm when the new ethics advisor will be appointed? Because we need to win back the trust of the British people, and how can we do that if there is no ethics advisor even in place? Since the last election, not even 3 years ago, Chair, we've had 2 Prime Ministers, 5 Chancellors, a slew of scandals, endless errors, a pile of broken promises. The Conservatives have lost the right to govern. And as this petition says loud and clear, the public have lost patience. A change of Chancellor isn't enough. The Tories have tried a change in Prime Minister, and it's worse than ever. We don't need, as has been rumoured, a trumped-up coronation of a new Tory leader either. We need a change in government. As the Chief Executive of Tesco said yesterday, there's just one team on the pitch now. Labour has a plan for growth and the Conservatives don't. Labour's approach will be based on working together with businesses, with workers and public bodies, all pulling together in a national endeavour to rebuild Britain and to seize the opportunities of the future. It's what Labour's plan to buy, make and sell more in Britain is all about, using all the tools at the government's disposal to support businesses in this country, bringing jobs back to Britain, sorting out the government's supply chain chaos, and not least, cleaning up the Tories' Brexit mess, taking action on the climate and nature emergencies, getting our economy firing on all cylinders. If there is a general election, and the people choose Labour's plan for growth over the Conservative anti-growth coalition, we would invest in people and skills and invest in our public services. We would rebalance the books based on fairness and tackling the climate emergency, not on the backs of working people and not by rewarding bankers. No wonder the people who signed this petition want this vision of stability over the current chaos, even if that means calling for a general election. For the good of the nation, we need a general election. Labour is election ready. We're ready for government. Only Labour offers the leadership and the ideas that Britain needs to secure the economy and get us out of this Tory-created mess. Thank you.
I now call Brendan Clark-Smith to respond to the debate on behalf of the government.
The luckiest man.
Thank you, Mr Mundell, and may I say, as always, what an absolute pleasure it is to serve under your chairmanship, and may I thank the Honourable Member for Newcastle North for bringing this debate here today for us to discuss. Of course, the nation and the world faces the challenges of not just Vladimir Putin's war in Ukraine, but also of recovering from the COVID-19 pandemic. And Putin's war has caused a global economic crisis with interest rates rising around the world. And I'm sure nobody would like a general election in this country more than Vladimir Putin. Families and businesses are feeling the impact across our country, from the cost of supermarket shop to their energy bills, as honourable members have already mentioned here today, of course. And in these tough times, the government is therefore taking decisive action to get Britain moving. I will give way.
Some points is made there, and I'm sorry to do this so early, but I'm just wondering if the Minister could tell us in what way Vladimir Putin caused mortgage rates to shoot up to the extent that they have.
I thank my honourable friend for his question, and of course I would also make the point, if we look at interest rates around the world at the moment, we can look at the strength of the US dollar, we can look at inflation, the rate it is going around Europe, and of course curbing inflation is very important to us, which I will come on to later as I discuss that and what the Chancellor, I believe, is talking about today. But of course, with families facing bills of up to £6,000 in the winter. We mentioned Tesco a lot today, and they always say every little helps. We think we can do better than that, of course, and a little isn't enough for many families around this country. And that is why we took decisive action that we did with a comprehensive package, so families would not be facing that. And of course, it has substantially reduced the expected peak inflation that we could have been looking at. We've supported families who need it most. We've been dealing with the tax burden, and we have cut the national insurance contributions as a result for that. That's for 28 million people. And global economic conditions are worsening because of this. We've had to adjust our programme, and that is a sign of a pragmatic government. Of course, this government is still going for growth, but we need to change the way that we approach this. And this government is committed to investment zones, to speeding up road projects, to standing up to Russia, and to increasing our energy supplies so we are never in this situation again. We're making it easier for businesses to take advantage of Brexit freedoms so they can do things more easily, leading to lower costs, lower prices, and of course, higher wages. And this government is on the side of hard-working people who do the right thing, and it is those we are delivering for. And we're putting our great country on the path to long-term success. We are taking on the anti-growth coalition from Labour and the Lib Dems to the protesters stopping people going to work by grinding roads and rail to a halt, as we've seen outside today. And this government's focus now is on bringing economic and political stability to the country. And it's this that will lower interest rates and restore confidence in sterling. We cannot afford to allow any drift to delay in this mission, and that is why the last thing we need now is a general election. The government has several priorities for the remainder of this Parliament, and we will use the power of free enterprise and free markets to level up the country and spread opportunity. We will drive reform and rebuild our economy to unleash our country's full potential. And we will cut onerous EU regulations smothering business and investment. But in terms of a mandate, and one of the reasons we are here today, the Conservative Party were elected with a majority in 2019. And we've recently gone through a process of selecting a leader of our party who is committed to delivering that Conservative programme in government. And we're facing significant global events that have changed our economic circumstances. We cannot ignore the impact of COVID or Putin's deplorable war in Ukraine, and that has created much of the economic hardship that has pushed up the price of energy, not just for us, but for the world. And the government came in and acted immediately to provide energy support for families who needed it the most by laying out a plan for economic growth. Now, the UK, of course, as has been mentioned by my honourable friend from Midlothian, is a parliamentary democracy and not a presidential system. And Prime Ministers hold their position by virtue of their ability to command the confidence of the House of Commons. And consequently, a change in the leader of a governing party does not trigger a general election. And the fact the change in leader of the governing party does not necessitate an election is one that is well established, of course. There's been precedent from both Labour and Conservatives in the past with Prime Ministers. The member for Uxbridge and South Ruislip, the member for Maidenhead, Gordon Brown, John Major, 5 of the last 7 Prime Ministers, in fact, began their tenure in office without the need for a general election. And in many cases, the next election followed several years after a Prime Minister began in office. And in the post-war era, this situation has been very common. Gordon Brown was in office for 3 years before the 2010 election, John Major for 2 between 1990 and 1992. Jim Callaghan held office in the 1970s without holding an election, just as Douglas Home held office for a year in the 1960s. And prior to this, Harold Macmillan was Prime Minister for 2 years before calling an election in 1959. Famously, of course, Winston Churchill's wartime administration was in office for 5 years in exceptional circumstances without an election taking place. And I could go on. Chamberlain, Lloyd George, Asquith, Balfour are all relevant examples. And the point is, Prime Ministers hold their position, I'll give way in a moment, by virtue of their ability to command the confidence of the House of Commons. There is no requirement on an incoming Prime Minister to call an election immediately on assuming office. I'll give way to the member for Hornsey and Wood Green.
Thank you very much. The Minister's very generous in giving way, and he is making an important point that general elections are not always necessary. But would he agree with me that one of the problems besetting the majority party at the moment is that in 2019, before the general election, when Mr Farage's party tipped into the Tory party, it did lead to a split in the party, which meant that the result is 2 parties within 1.
I think my honourable friend makes a good point, and of course all political parties at times will have disagreements, and one of the things that makes me such a proud Conservative is that broad church that we operate under. And I believe it is that broad church with many of my colleagues with differing views but who come together with those shared values. And this is why Conservatives who have been elected and been given that mandate, we can change leadership, but we will still have that Conservative government delivering Conservative policies. And earlier this year, delivering on a Conservative manifesto, promised Parliament passed legislation repealing the Fixed Term Parliaments Act. This was a very flawed piece of legislation. It ran counter to the core constitutional principles of our country, and I believe it had a damaging effect on the functioning of parliamentary democracy. And the Dissolution and Calling of Parliament Act returned us to tried and tested constitutional arrangements for dissolving Parliament and calling elections, which passed through the Commons with broad agreement across the House. I believe not a single Labour MP voted against that at the second or the third reading. And by repealing this and its opaque provisions, it reaffirmed the convention that government holds office by virtue of its ability to command that confidence in the House of Commons. Colleagues are in a privileged position to put views to the Prime Minister and senior colleagues. I'd encourage them to do so. And, of course, we have debates like those here today and appropriate forums, of course. And the government is entitled to assume it has the confidence of the House unless and until it is shown to be otherwise. That can only be demonstrated unambiguously by a means of formal confidence vote. And, therefore, this government, under the new Prime Minister, continues to command the confidence of the Commons. Once again, the Prime Minister can call a general election at any time of her choosing by requesting a dissolution of Parliament from the Sovereign, which, if accepted, leads to a general election. And as a result, when the next election will take place, rests with the Prime Minister. On the appointment of the Chancellor, who I believe is still giving his statement at the moment, the Prime Minister asked the Honourable Member for South West Surrey to become the new Chancellor. And as the Prime Minister said, the Chancellor is one of the most experienced and widely respected government ministers and parliamentarians. And she has asked him to deliver that medium-term fiscal plan, which he's giving a statement to the House to as I speak. And this will see through the support we're giving. The member for Pontypridd, the Newport West, also mentioned about the cost of living. This is very important to us. We want to get this right. We want to get the energy price guarantee. Of course, we've already given £400 to every household, £1,200 to the most vulnerable, £150 back on their council tax as well as other support. And we want to help the most vulnerable in society, and we want the right targeted packages to be able to do that, of course. But of course, to do that, we also need to have sustainable public finances and to show fiscal responsibility. And this is something the Chancellor of the Exchequer will be talking about today. We want to bring our debts down. We want to make sure that inflation is low. We want to make sure that interest rates are at a sensible rate. We don't set those, the Bank of England do, but we want a situation where people can afford their mortgages. I've been in a situation before where I bought my first house. The financial crisis happened, and it was a very, very difficult period for people who were homeowners. We want to help people get through this. You know, we are a nation of homeowners. We want to protect people. We want to protect the most vulnerable. And, of course, we want them to be able to pay their energy bills, to be able to do their food shopping as well. I will give way.
I thank the Minister. I thank the Minister for the history lesson. And I don't think the people who signed the petition thought that we needed a new government because of the change of leader. It was because of the policies of the new leader, and that's why so many people are signing it. In my constituency, mortgages are going up by an average of 500 across the country. It'll be a lot more in my constituency. So those homeowners are the very ones who are signing this petition saying we've had enough of these policies. There hasn't been fiscal restraint. It's been really damaging. We need to see a change of policies. How many changes of leader would there need to be? So the current Prime Minister's real credibility has been lost because her budget has been thrown out, a new one's coming in, so she herself may need to be replaced. How many changes of leader of the Conservative Party would there need to be before the Minister thought there should be a general election?
I thank the honourable member for putting forward her question there. Of course, what people want to see is stability, they want some certainty, and this is, of course, what the markets wanted, which is why we've acted decisively on that, why the Prime Minister has been very clear. She has acted pragmatically. She's appreciated when things haven't worked, and she's changed tack as a result of that. And I think that is a sign of a strong government that can do that, and I fully support the Prime Minister in her efforts for that. And as the honourable member from Midlothian mentioned as well, about wanting another referendum for Scotland, of course I would argue that Scotland has already had that referendum. People did make that choice, and they want that same stability. They want to know what the future holds for them. They made their choice, and they see that as being part of that stability. They worry about their interest rates. They worry about their houses. They worry about inflation as well. And, of course, we want to govern for the whole union, and I will give way.
I just find this slightly perplexing, because a lot of the Minister's argument today is about the strong decisions of the government in changing their mind, about the ability of the Prime Minister to change her mind and take a different direction. But then he makes exactly the opposite argument when it comes to Scotland in terms of deciding the constitutional future of our nation. So how can it be the Prime Minister or the UK government can change its mind over the matter of weeks, yet despite every promise made during a referendum campaign in 2014, 8 years ago, the people of Scotland are not somehow allowed to make a different decision?
Well, I think I'll bring my honourable friend back to the point that we're in an ever-changing world at the moment. Nobody expected the COVID-19 pandemic. Nobody expected what Vladimir Putin has done in Ukraine, of course. And yes, I do take the point that circumstances change, but what people do want is that stability of the things that they want to see constant. You know, they want to be able to support their families. They want to be able to pay their bills. And we believe by supporting those devolved governments, by working together, by protecting our union, that is the best way to do that. I will give way.
I'm grateful for the Minister for giving way on that point. He is, of course, a Minister for the Union, and as my honourable friend, the Shadow Minister, quite rightly said, since the Prime Minister has been in post, both First Ministers of Scotland and Wales have not received a phone call or any contact from the Prime Minister. If the Prime Minister and this government are so committed to the Union, can the Minister tell us when exactly the Prime Minister will be in contact with the First Ministers, and why has it taken so long for her to be in touch?
I'm sure the Prime Minister will, and over the summer you'll have heard the Prime Minister speaking with great passion about the Union and, of course, protecting it. And in terms of Wales, we can see that the 18 billion annual funding for the Welsh Government is the largest in real terms since devolution actually began. So not just words, but also actions. I can point to the 121 million for Levelling Up Fund for 10 projects. I could point to the 790 million of investment across 4 Welsh cities, 115 million for the Swansea Bay City deal, 500 million for the Cardiff City deal. And I'm sure the Prime Minister in due course will be contacting those elected leaders to see how we can work closely together. Also, I believe Honourable Member for Putney mentioned about the ethics advisor. I understand the Prime Minister is considering, and she's going to be updating on that in due course. But what I would say, Mr Mundell, is we're in extraordinarily tough times amid the global economic crisis, and we must remember where this country was heading only a month ago. Families and businesses fearing unaffordable energy bills higher than £6,000. Inaction would have been unthinkable, and the human cost unforgivable. Businesses would have gone bust, jobs would have been lost, and that is why we took the decision to protect people from the worst energy crisis this winter, and of course businesses too. And we were elected in 2019 on a pro-growth, pro-aspiration and pro-enterprise agenda, on the side of hard-working people and all those who make our country great. And this is what we will continue to do. Today, we've moved to cut national insurance, putting £330 in taxpayers' pockets. And we're delivering a clear plan to get Britain growing through bold supply-side reform. However, growth requires stability, and that is what we are offering. We need to move forward and deliver for the British people. A general election risks sending us back to square one by letting the anti-growth coalition into power. And we will do whatever it takes to get through the storm and emerge a stronger and better nation. Thank you, Mr Mundell.
Thank you, and I'm going to now call Catherine McKinnell to wind up the debate, and you have approximately 1 hour 40 minutes.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the members who have contributed to today's debate. As we know, this debate took place at a time where some very important business in the Chamber, some urgent question from the Leader of the Opposition, and a statement from the Chancellor. So I'm really grateful to members that have been able to be here today and for their contributions. The member for Pontypridd, the member for Newport West, Hornsey Wood Green, and the member for Putney speaking from the front bench. The case for a general election, and obviously the front bench from the SNP as well, putting very clearly how untenable this situation is for our country. And I do thank the Minister for his reply. He's clearly on a difficult ticket today. And I was struck in his response how powerfully he set out the case for a general election. Indeed, we are in unprecedented times. Indeed, it was an interesting lesson in history, but all of that history will tell him and us that a general election is the only way to get us out of this current crisis. And nothing he will have said today will have persuaded anybody watching this debate otherwise. It is disappointing that despite the member at the front bench being present here today, that not a single member of the governing party came here today to either speak for a general election or indeed to speak against it. Nobody was here to represent the petitioners in their constituencies that wanted this matter discussed. And I'll leave it to the 632,000 and growing number of people who've signed this petition from every part of the UK to speculate why that might be. And the events in the Chamber that we're missing because we're here, but hearing reports, they do very much underline the shambles currently at the heart of government. That the Leader of the House had to reassure the Chamber that the Prime Minister wasn't hiding under a desk really does show how low the bar has become. And I guess we should just be grateful that she's not hiding in a fridge. That the Prime Minister then turned up, but just in time not to answer any questions, and left before questions then began again to the Chancellor, shows how weak and undermined her position is. And as the Leader of the Leader of the Opposition said very clearly, she is in office, but not in power. And that is unforgivable for the people of this country that need strong leadership and strong government, whoever that might be, to provide it at this time. The petition calls for an end to the chaos because the current situation is not sustainable. The Parliamentary Secretary to the Cabinet Office was unable to answer how a government without a mandate and without authority will be able to get any of its agenda through Parliament. And the Minister made great play of the importance of having the confidence of MPs in Parliament, and that has not been properly tested, but from what we can see, there is a lot of confidence lacking within the current governing party, and that is degrading for our democracy and unacceptable for the people that we are here to serve. Because our country faces serious crises. We are living through a cost of living crisis, an energy crisis, a climate crisis, and now an economic crisis that is entirely of the government's own making, no matter what they say. And it is households that are already paying the price for that. So, Chair, the current situation is untenable. The Prime Minister's authority has disappeared. This country cannot function to its greatest potential without a functioning government. And we will only be able to wait and see whether whatever this agenda for governing might be, because none of it reflects what was promised in the summer, whether that can be delivered through Parliament. But the fact that we're even wondering just shows how unsustainable this has become and how lack of confidence will be already impacting people's investment decisions, our ability to grow. The only anti-growth coalition at the moment is a government that's unwilling to go to the public and ask them for a mandate to deliver what it believes. And I think the time has come, and I think increasingly government members need to recognise that we're here to serve the public. The public can decide. They can vote to decide to put this government back in, or they can choose something different. But fundamentally, that should be a choice for the people in this country and not for us in this room.
The question is that this House has considered E-petition 619781 relating to an early general election. As many as of that opinion say aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Order, order. The sitting stands adjourned.
The proceeding has ended. The proceeding has ended. The proceeding has